Today on The Big Story, it's the first day back to school after the Chinese New Year break. But is it too soon? Meanwhile, the Wuhan virus continues its spread across Asia and the rest of the world. The death toll has risen to 132. And finally, Singapore's growing generation gap, divide between young and old along social and political lines. It's 5:30 p.m. here in Singapore and you're watching The Big Story, where we will discuss the hottest topics of the day and explain why they matter. I'm Haryanto Diman, coming to you live from the Straits Times newsroom. It's back to school today for students across Singapore after the Chinese New Year break. This comes amid some online chatter that the reopening of schools should have been delayed. The Ministry of Education, or MOE, did not delay the opening of schools for a week or two, like what Hong Kong has done. The decision came after MOE sought advice from medical experts, as there is currently no evidence of community spread of the virus in Singapore. MOE added Singapore's situation is different from Hong Kong, as Hong Kong is closer to the epicenter of the Wuhan virus outbreak. We also spoke to parents and primary school pupils about precautions taken on the first day of school. Have a look.
Kita bimbang jugalah. Kalau boleh jauhkanlah.
我是照常样，没有什么担心啦，只是说不要出国啦，不要去人多的地方啦，这样。
Ada kasih mask, ada kasih temperature dia check, diorang check. Sebelum masuk ke sekolah tu diorang check dulu kanak-kanak ni. Sama ada kanak-kanak ni ada sema-sema ke batuk ke apa, diorang ambil tindakan juga, memang ada ambil tindakan.
When I go to MRTs, my mother would usually tell me to wear mask because there's a lot of people, so like this will increase the chances of getting the virus.
我没有戴，我不习惯呢，我戴了，人家咳嗽我会先闪开啦。
My mother is buying more masks and hand sanitizer in case something bad happens. And she always asks us to wash our hands before eating and after eating.
Now we have journalist Jolene Ang to share more with us. Hi Jolene. Jolene, so MOE put up the post with regard to there is no delay to the opening of school. And one other issue that is addressed in the post as well is the difference between a leave of absence and a quarantine order. Could you explain to us what is the difference between the two?
Okay, the leave of absence was first mentioned a few days ago, right, when they said that for students and teachers, anyone who had travelled to China, in the past 2 weeks, they would be on a 14-day leave of absence, so they would do home-based learning for students. So firstly, the difference between the two is that the leave of absence is not legally binding, whereas a quarantine order is, and if someone doesn't comply when they are served the quarantine order, they can face penalties. But in both cases, the individuals, whether it's leave of absence or quarantine orders, they're both healthy. So it's just that if you are served a quarantine order, it means that you have a higher risk of exposure to the virus. For example, if your family member has the virus, for example. Right. Yeah. So for the leave of absence, it's more of a precautionary measure. Yeah. So it's not as strict. So for example, MOE also said that if you're under the LOA, it doesn't mean that you have to stay at home the whole time. So maybe you can still go out to buy a meal or something. Yeah, you don't have to isolate yourself completely.
Right. And of course, for the students, for example, if they are unable to attend school for, say, LOA reasons and such, what arrangements are there for these students then?
Okay, so previously, I think Education Minister Ong Ye Kung also said that it doesn't mean that if you're on an LOA, it's an extended holiday. So you still have to do your work. There's still homework, there's still assignments. Right. It's just that it's all done from home, and the students can contact the teachers through, for example, email if they have any questions or if they can't keep up in class. So they still have to do their own revision, their own learning at home. Yeah. And we've asked MOE for more details on exactly how this home-based learning will be implemented. Right. Because the schools have experience with e-learning before. but now it's on a national level rolled out in all schools. So we've asked for more details, but MOE has yet to respond to us.
Right. Now, Jolene, of course, some university dorms have been converted to quarantine facilities as well, and there were concerns that this would put the wider student population at risk. What is MOE's response to that?
Okay, yeah. So there are, in the three universities, NTU, NUS and SMU, there are certain hostels that have been designated as government quarantine facilities. But it's only certain blocks in certain halls. And apparently, according to the FAQ, these three areas have been designated as the government's as places for in cases of disease outbreaks. Yeah. So, but MOE did say that there are safeguards in place to make sure that there are no unnecessary risks for the people around them. So, for example, if you are quarantined, primarily it's for students or staff who have no better area for quarantine. For example, if they don't have accommodation of their own, like if you are a student from China and you don't have a house of your own, then and if you are suspected, you're at risk, then they will put you there. But a person serving the quarantine order will not be able to leave the designated area for the entire period, and they will not be able to use all the common facilities. They will not be allowed to have visitors, and even food and drink and all, it will be delivered to them. So they can't actually really have any human contact with people outside of the designated area. So I think that is quite reassuring.
Well, thank you so much, Jolene, for coming onto the show to explain further with regard to MOE's response to the school reopening that is today. Now, for more on this story, you can visit our website at straitstimes.com. Moving overseas, the death toll from the Wuhan virus had climbed to 132 in China, with 25 reported overnight. And almost 6,000 cases have been confirmed, surpassing the 2003 SARS epidemic in China. Meanwhile, the virus continues its spread across Asia and the rest of the world. Taiwan, Vietnam and Germany have reported infections caused by human-to-human transmission. A top respiratory diseases expert in China said the outbreak had yet to reach its peak and that he expected it to do so within a week to 10 days. However, Hong Kong academics predicted infections will only peak months later, around May. We have China correspondent Elizabeth Law to give us the latest updates. Now, Liz just returned from China last week and is currently working from home just to be on the safe side. Hi, Liz.
Hi, Jan.
Hi, Liz. Welcome. Now, it seems, Liz, that the spread of the virus is not slowing down, already outnumbering the number of people infected by SARS in China now. And, of course, another 25 that was dead overnight. How are the people coping there?
Well, so earlier this morning, I spoke to some people from Wuhan who were saying that basically what is like in the city is that it's pretty much become a ghost town. But I think one challenge is also how to keep yourself being positive, to be upbeat, because it is quite difficult being cooped up in an apartment for an extended period. I mean, I know I've been here since I got back from Beijing last week. So basically, we have seen some online videos of people shouting out of their windows at night, saying that, is there anyone there? I'm bored. I want to get into an argument with someone. And also, this lady that I spoke to, Scarlett, she says that what she's done is that she's been going online more than usual. She's actually paid premium subscription for all of the video streaming services, and also basically she says she's never read these many books ever. But of course, there are some people who are also quite worried, like this photographer I spoke to. He has a pregnant wife who is due next month, and they are a little bit concerned about when she's going to deliver the baby, whether or not the hospital would be safe, and they're looking at going to a hospital slightly further away from where they live in Wuhan, in hopes that maybe it would be slightly safer. But of course, one last thing is that the challenge is because earlier I saw that you guys spoke to someone here in Singapore who said that this elder lady who said that, I don't wear a mask because I'm not used to it. And basically, this is the exact same challenge that people in Wuhan are facing. The older folk, they don't quite believe how serious this can be, and they're like, why should I be wearing a mask? Because it's really uncomfortable, And so that is one of the challenges that they're facing. But they are trying to. Obviously, it's become so serious that people are now getting an idea that, okay, I need to wear a mask even though it's uncomfortable, but because if not, I'm going to die.
Yeah. Now, Liz, it does sound quite serious there. And as the number of infections increase outside of Wuhan, is there a growing sense of resentment within China against people from Wuhan?
Well, I think quite significantly, there is, because earlier today at a press conference, I'm just going to call this up on my screen. Earlier today at a press conference, hosted by the National Health Commission, one of the officials actually said that we have to make clear that our common enemy is the disease and virus, not the Wuhan people. So, I mean, the fact that a senior government official has to say this, I think it really shows how the tide is turning. Of course, it is not to a scale where people are really mean and terrible to people from Wuhan or being discriminatory. But I think the government also wants to try and nip this in the bud before it escalates and gets too much. I mean, some quarters of the internet, we have seen already people posting stuff saying that let's just all ban people from Wuhan, let's stop people from Wuhan from coming out forever. I mean, in normal situations, people on the internet can be very, very terrible. And I suppose when you've been cooped up at home for the better part of about 10 days, it just makes that a lot worse.
And Liz, of course, what are the Chinese authorities doing now? You know, are they doing anything else more to help the situation?
So basically, we have seen there have been travel restrictions in quite a lot of places. They are doing the best that they can. They are trying to increase, like make sure that supplies of provisions and all sorts of things are sufficient for people. There are safeguards in place. Whether or not they can do more, I mean, they already are doing the best that they can, and WHO has also said that they are going to send in experts to China to help. I think one of the things is that the very big concern is that a super spreader might emerge. They've said that there hasn't been a super spreader that has emerged yet, but we already know of at least one case where a man infected 14 medical workers. So that is something that is quite concerning, because we all do know that SARS actually spread quite quickly and very widely because of these so-called super spreaders. Basically, one person that can actually spread to quite a lot of people. So I think that is one of the biggest concerns now, and also I suppose it's really about trying to manage the movement of people, because now that the Spring Festival holidays are almost over, people are going to be going back into the cities from the rural areas, and there are worries that this may lead to yet another spike. So that is something that we will have to wait and see.
Well, thank you so much, Liz, for the updates. Certainly, we are looking forward to you returning to the office. Now, the wildlife trade in China has been put under the spotlight recently, and Chinese authorities have temporarily banned the trade of wild animals following the virus outbreak. In the latest episode of Asian Insider, host Nimal Ghosh speaks to a zoonotic disease expert and a wildlife crime expert about the risk of disease from the wildlife and exotic pet trades. So here are the highlights.
So, Dr. Tajak, the issue of zoonotic diseases crossing from animal species to humans, has been a major concern in the scientific and public health communities, but it's not really top of mind in the general public. Do you think it will be different this time around? Do you think this issue will get it the attention it deserves across the board?
Well, I really hope so, actually. I mean, we seem to, every time a new disease is emerging, we all seem to say, wow, that disease came from nowhere. We didn't expect it. Yet, to those of us working on what drives this, it's absolutely predictable. We're going to see more and more of these as we do more things to the environment around the world, as more people are on the planet, and more people are doing things like hunting and eating wildlife. These are high-risk activities. And I think we really need to get to the underlying causes of this.
So now we hear that China has imposed a temporary ban on wildlife in markets. Justin, this has happened before, this kind of temporary ban, after SARS, for instance. The bans are useless without enforcement. And China is the focus now of this outbreak, but other countries could be next. What are your expectations of this?
Absolutely. We've seen bans before for these kind of diseases. Then they've been relaxed again. So we've gone back to business as usual, and look what happens. So many people are welcoming this temporary ban and asking for it to be made permanent. But One of the things that we haven't really focused on is how that ban is going to be forced. Now, the language that was used by the Chinese government is quite robust in the sound of it, but we need to see tangible enforcement. And one of the reasons we have this problem with this particular disease is a lack of enforcement against the illegal wildlife trade, not just in China, but globally. It's a woefully inadequate response to the illegal wildlife trade. So unless we have enforcement of that ban, it's likely to be largely ineffective.
What are your expectations of China's temporary ban on illegal wildlife in markets?
Well, first of all, we're absolutely delighted that China's put a temporary ban on wildlife in markets. However, that's exactly what happened in the SARS outbreak. And, we tracked the trade in wildlife in southern China since SARS. Our goal was to go to the wildlife markets where SARS emerged and to trace the trade in wildlife to see where the virus came from. And what we found after SARS was the wildlife trade was open again. China had loosened the regulations, but a lot of wildlife just weren't there in markets. And we saw a shift in the way people were trading wildlife. Hunters were supplying to middlemen who were then supplying directly to restaurants. So I would call in perhaps on Tuesday and say, I'm bringing some business friends over for dinner on Friday. Can you supply me with some crocodile meat, some bats, some civets? It's a special meal with great cultural significance. And then the restaurant owner would get in touch with middlemen who would supply them live animals butchered on site. So the trade is still there. It's harder to track, and people are more wary in talking about it. China has tried its best, I think, it's tried a lot to deal with this. But what we're dealing with in China and in Southeast Asia and throughout the world are thousands of years of cultural significance to the food animals that are eaten from wildlife. And I think breaking that is going to be harder than just simple banning. We need education programs about the health risks. We need to use the health impact of wildlife trade to try and put people off eating and trading in animals. We've started to do that. We've surveyed people in China and found that older generations are the ones that eat wildlife. The younger generations are less interested. We should be using that to push this agenda and to help people across the world realize that this is unhealthy for them and unhealthy for our planet.
For the full video, you can check it out on the Straits Times YouTube page. Also, do visit straitstimes.com for the latest on the Wuhan virus. And on that also, you can subscribe to our Telegram channel, the Straits Times. On to our last segment, the young and old in Singapore are divided in the way they view certain socio-political issues. And this divide is rapidly widening. The divide in viewpoints is between the baby boomer generation, those born between 1944 and 1964, and younger millennials born between 1980 to 1995, as well as those in Generation or Gen Z, born in 1996 to the 2000s. Recent studies suggest that on some socio-political issues, the gap is unprecedented, not only in terms of how wide it is, but how rapidly it is widening. Whether it is climate change, race and religion, or lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer or LGBTQ rights, chances are one will find people of the younger generation at the forefront of the cause. We have journalist T. Cho to share more on this. Welcome, T.
Thanks, Aaron.
Now, T, if you could tell us, what are some of these issues that we see a divide in?
So the issues are mostly socio-political, like, for example, attitudes, about how responsive and collaborative the government should be, and on issues of race and religion. For example, with race, while about 6 or 7 in 10 of Chinese Singaporeans below 30 years old are, okay with a Malay or Indian Prime Minister, the number drops to about 4 in 10 of those when you count those 60 and above. But by far the kind of starkest divide is on LGBTQ issues. So over 5 times as many people between 18 and 25 compared to those above 65 are okay with sex between adults of the same sex.
Right.
But it's not just about the obviously sizable gap in views. The gap is also widening. So in 2013, a quarter of those aged 20 to 24 thought gay marriage was not wrong, but only 11% aged between 55 and 59 thought so. And then 5 years later, in 2018, the proportion for the younger cohort, by then they were aged 25 to 29, had doubled to about 50%. But the corresponding figure for the older cohort barely moved, so now just 15%. So while millennials became more liberal, the older folks stayed the same, and therefore widening the gap.
Right. And why is there this growing gap between the old and the young with these issues?
Well, to be fair, there will always be a variance in views between people born of, two completely distinct social contexts. No doubt our parents were also thought of as rebels in their own day by their own parents. And I think what's different is, the rapidity, the speed at which this gap is growing. And I think there are a few factors. For some issues like climate change, a large part of it is simply urgency. Millennials like me will probably be the ones having to live through the worst effects of climate change. So it really shouldn't be that surprising that, we care so much about it. Then there's, of course, the use of social media, which those younger are naturally more comfortable with. On the one hand, it makes it far easier to organize on urgent social issues, but on the other, it could also mean that separate age groups can basically silo themselves, not listen to each other, and along their differences of opinion, thereby reinforcing existing beliefs. And then with social media also comes greater connectivity, which can also be about physical mobility. And I think the economic and connectivity situation during the generations of our grandparents or our parents was very different. Now, I spoke to Professor Tommy Koh, and he told me that he and his wife, for example, grew up in a time when Singapore was poor. And even now it informs how they think about spending and how frugal they are. So, and on the point of affluence, I would also say that, our generation probably has much better access to education, much higher levels, and also are therefore exposed to much more ideas.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Steve, for coming onto the show to shed more light on this. Now, for more on the story, you can check it out on Straits Times website. There we have it, our top stories for today. For more news and videos, do log on to straitstimes.com. Once again, I'm Haryanto. See you tomorrow for more stories on The Big Story.